Damn it! Oh, come on. Dude, I hit the button. I swear to God I wasn't standing in that fire. Why? Okay, alright. One more time and then I'm gonna go. Oh my God, okay, I quit. Who created this crap? Ah!
You suck, old man.
What'd you say? What'd you say? How old are you?
12.
You're 12? Oh, get out of here, kid. I'm gonna go tell your mom.
Get good, scrub.
You get good. You are listening to Scrubs vs. the World with your host, Cyrub. And welcome into the show, everyone. Tonight, we are going to dive deep into the macro pool and help you guys build those macros to help you play the World of Warcraft more efficiently. With me on this adventure is my good friend, Projali. How you doing tonight?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, man. Trying not to go crazy. Just living that dream.
The COVID-19 dream.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the introvert's dream, right?
Yes.
Even though I'm ready to wake up from the dream, I want to go. I want to go do something. Go bowling or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's having the option taken away, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we play D&D together and Magic, and I want to do that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good time.
It does.
We have to finish our Rick and Morty adventure.
It has not been completed yet. There are many answers left unanswered.
Hell yeah. Well, cool, man. Thanks for joining me. I know you were on episode 3, and we talked about mythic raiding and what it takes to get into a mythic raid.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured you'd be a great resource to bring back. Now, I could be wrong. This could be a total dud, but we're going to roll the dice and see.
I believe.
I believe too. I believe. So what are some of the things that you have been doing in game lately?
So lately, we have been working our way through Mythic Nyalotha, the Waking City. Currently about to down Carapace and move on to N'Zoth probably this week.
Nice.
Run a Mythic Plus. Leveling alts with this nice XP buff.
Hell yeah. Well, you helped me the other night get from like 398 to 430, I believe, running Mythic Plus.
Yes.
On the old High Mountain Tauren Shamalama Ding Dong. So that was good. I appreciate that. I know when I went in there, I just want to share a fun little scrub moment here. I have enchanted gloves that do the crafting speed upgrade or speed increase, whatever the hell you want to call it. Because I'm doing inscription on this character, and I didn't want to, inscribe all these things super slowly. And so I have a pair of random green gloves that I use to inscribe faster. Well, I found out that I forgot to put on my good gloves until like the 4th run. I was like, oh, that's why I'm not doing anything. Okay. So I went from like a 280 something glove to like a 455 glove or something like that. Yeah. So I figured I'd share that. That was pretty funny.
I have done the inverse where I have not equipped my crafting gloves and gone to break down or make 800 inks at some time and come back and why isn't it done yet? Oh, I forgot the whole reason I have those gloves.
Whoops.
Beautiful.
That was, yeah. So I thought I'd share that with you. I thought that was pretty funny. I didn't want to say that because I think there's a couple of your guildies in there. I think the paladin that was with us was kind of getting annoyed with me, but
no,
that's okay.
No,
kept asking totally for Tremor Totem. I'm like, dude, I didn't even know that fear was common, man.
Right. Asking for it after the fact's a little late, man.
Could have warned me, bro. I could have been paying attention, but whatever.
No, we were running and gunning. It was
we were
getting through it.
But no, I learned so much in those runs. like the snap taunting that the
Mm-hmm.
tank was doing in Atal Dazar.
There's some sneaky stuff you can do in Atal to
Oh
make the
man,
pulls a lot less. You have to heal one person at that point.
yeah, no, that was awesome. So good stuff overall. Might have to do a little blog post or something on that. But we're not here to talk about that for the most part. We're here to talk about macros. So to start off, I've been getting a lot of questions on, well, how do you do this? Like, what is a macro? You talk about this in your other shows. We're going to dive into that and talk about how to make these things and how to create them in a way that'll help you communicate, play more efficiently, help you just in general, because they're really cool. Mm-hmm. So to start off, what is a macro? Let's start at the basics.
Yeah. So macro, you can think of, in a basic sense, it's a way to make your life easier with a button press. So you can build it really, really basic. You can build it really complex. You can add scripts that you would sometimes see in an add-on, as long as it's not super long code. You can also just do something like stack an unused trinket with one of your spell casts. That way you're not having to remember to press 2 buttons to accomplish one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So a good example of that. Now, when I heal in raids, I have a macro that I have created to help let my other healers know when I drop something. When I drop Healing Tide Totem, for example, my tune also does a /RW, so /raid warning, that does a big roll tide. So to achieve that, I made a macro to help because my heal lead didn't know when I was dropping these things. This is before, was it Exorcist raid tools? Is that what it's called? Yeah, before that came out. He has that now, which is awesome. But before that, we had to use these. We relied on these because he would have one that would yell at us when he was using his Tranquility. So super awesome for communication, and just like you're saying, getting those babies dialed in. So now this is a coding piece. What coding language are we using when we're creating these macros?
So WoW scripting runs off of something called Lua, and it's used throughout the game, both in what they call protected code on WoW side, where only that's stuff that's considered only clickable through the UI. So you can't code something that's protected Lua. There are various unprotected codes that we can run scripts on and bring back commands to what we're trying to accomplish. So you can also build it without really advanced scripting. So it's very basic commands. You don't have to be a programmer to figure this stuff out.
Which is pretty awesome, because I'm not. Now I know some SQL and stuff like that, but that doesn't help me in this situation. But creating these macros isn't that hard, just to do basic ones.
Nope.
You can get complex, because I know Jin at Morally Gray shared with me his macro setup, and I was just like, holy crap, man, how did you even track what the hell you're doing here? But and it's very similar to actually this macro that you shared with me here as well. So we'll dive into that here in the next section. So what are some of the limitations that we have with macros? Because like you're saying, there's protected Luas. What can we do? What can't we do?
So it's not going to make what you might consider a smart decision for you. So it's not going to cast a spell if you're at a specific cooldown. It's not going to check if you have buffs on you. It's not going to let you get around multiple GCDs. So if you're trying to stack spells that are both on a global cooldown, it's going to consistently try and cast the first one in that list. So you're not going to be able to double up on casts. It also has a character limit. So if you're trying to get super duper complex, you may want to explore creating an add-on for whatever you're trying to accomplish. Or weak auras actually have a lot of interaction with the with what you might do with the macro as well. So It's got some limitations, but for the most part, it's just Blizzard trying to make sure you're trying to make it more efficient, but not play the game for you.
And didn't they have some of that in the past where people were abusing that?
They did. And a lot of the DPS classes that used to benefit from something like a cast sequence macro, which is completely valid to design, the mechanics are much more proc based now. So you wouldn't necessarily benefit. You'd be losing a lot of DPS if you're just constantly doing the same rotation with your cast sequence macro.
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't want that action in there.
No.
You're not gonna. Well, it's like, as an example for what you're saying. So I've been trying to get sponsored by the guy who made the Hikili DPS add-on. And that thing, like you're saying, the procs, it will jump things up into the order to kind of give an example of kind of visualizing what you're saying, because of the proc. So like every time my lava burst comes up, it jumps right to the front of the line, even if it might say like lightning bolt is my next spell.
Yeah.
So it's just to give an idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is a difference between classic and current game. Obviously,
Yes.
two different games, but the macro structures are different there. Where I don't think we need to really dive into the differences there. But what were some of the things? It was the mouse over, is that right? Or the mouse at cursor?
So mouse over works. They introduced, I think it was in Legion, they introduced at cursor conditionals and at player conditionals. Or not, at self, something like that. So there's a couple of those conditionals that you can't use in Classic. They also, my understanding is they don't have focus targeting in Classic. So that was something added in BC, and they kept to that with, I guess, the Classic macros. You can't do focus target.
Okay. Yeah, and I haven't played around in this current version of Classic, so I don't know what those differences are. So if you're playing Classic and listening to this, just know that there are a couple limitations that you're going to run into, and those that were mentioned are probably it. Because I don't know because they're using the Kata client, I believe.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if they fixed the macro piece to that. I raw dog Classic anyway, so I'm not using macros. I'm standard UI. I'm clicking everything. I'm trying to recreate my experience.
I can respect it.
Yeah. All right, so moving along here. So what are some of the things that you have macroed yourself?
So, oh man, we've got all sorts of macros. So we have class specific. So I've been maining a druid this expansion. So a lot of what I have is revolving around druid play. I have a CC macro, I guess you could call it, because a lot of the druid talented CC is all in the same tree, and rather than having to keep switching macros, having to do something dependent on what talent spec I'm in at that point, you can set up a macro to kind of have differences based on your talent and spec choices. So that's a clean way to do a macro. I have, since I'm a troll, I want to make sure I'm always using berserking with my celestial alignment or my incarn buff on my balanced druid. You want to kind of combine those two if you can. So I have those macroed, and you can do that because berserking's not on the GCD. Similar to unused trinkets, those are something you can still macro with another ability because they're not activating the global cooldown.
Very cool.
I use a lot of mouse over macros for things like entangling roots or rebirth or innervate. Those are really useful in PvE content. And you've always got your chat spam macros too if you need.
Right. Well, and hitting back on the mouse over macro, that has been something like if you were attempting to heal or anything like that, a lot of people say that mouse over macro because that's another option. You can do that. How does that work exactly? Do you just mouse over the thing you want to cast a spell or an attack on, or is that like you have to click it, select it, and do it? Like I've never made one.
So if you've never used it before, it feels a little wonky. Like where is my mouse? Can I trust that it's actually going to land on what I want it to land on? But essentially, the easiest way to think about what is valid for a mouse over is if I could target it, that's a pretty good baseline. So if I can click it and it's going to target it, that's a valid thing for me to mouse over. So whether it's a raid frame, whether it's a party frame, a player frame, a boss mob, the nameplate of a target will work as well. So something that's really nice, a good example is I have my solar beam set up so that if I have a mouse over that's a harm target, you can put a conditional on it like this is an enemy, basically. That will let whatever my mouse over is, that's what I'm going to solar beam. So some fights you may be attacking the boss, but there's an ad off to the side. I need to interrupt this ad. You could do something like a at mouse over. You could just hover your mouse over that mob while you're attacking the boss. That way you're free to kick it whenever you need to, and you don't have to switch targets.
And so you just mouse it over, select whatever slot you put that macro into, and that will get you the glory there.
Exactly.
Cool. So yeah, so I know, like for me, for example, I use Voodoo for my healing assist. No, you could totally have. Now, can you have the raid frames open and just mouse over that and click the buttons?
You can, yeah.
Or
so
buttons?
Raid frames, yeah. A lot of people, especially if they do PvP healing, where you're much less likely to use an add-on like click, where your click is essentially doing mouse over keybinds. Voodoo, I think, also has a built-in way for you to keybind clicks and modifiers to whatever you're clicking on the raid frame to cast a different heal. Those are essentially mouse overs, just built into the add-on. So I know a lot of teammates that I raid with will still use mouse over macros just because that's what they were used to, and they're effectively the same thing. But yeah, raid frames are definitely a valid target for mouse over.
Cool. Yeah, and I only put that out there just so we can have kind of more options on the table, because I know some people don't like using like a heal bot or a Voodoo because it's kind of a pain in the butt to set up. I mean, it's easier now than when it was back in the day.
Yes.
Because I remember when I first started, oh man, like I used Healbot, and if you were not in a raid group that was evenly matched, like as far as like having the right amount of members, then your frames were all off. You'd have 4 on one side and then 7 on the other, and it just wasn't pretty. So I wish I would have looked into mouse overs back then a little bit more to make it a little easier. But well, cool. So now this is going to be hard to visualize because we're talking, and I will totally put this on the website. So I'll talk about that later, but I'm going to copy and paste this macro here that we shared in our notes. So it'll hopefully make more sense, but let's just kind of break this macro down that you submitted. So in here, it says #. So for all you Zoomers out there, it's a hashtag. Show tooltip, all one word, /cast, and then you have left bracket. So the nice, clean, straight line bracket, not the squirrely one. And then it's @mouseover, all one word, comma, harm, comma, exists, comma, talent, :1, close bracket. And then another bracketed talent, :1, then mighty bash. Let's kind of run through that line of code. Now that was invigorating podcasting right there.
Indeed.
But what is that line of code telling the macro to do?
Yeah, so first off, I hope everybody memorized that. There's a quiz at the end. So show tooltip is, you'll see that really commonly in macros, and essentially that's telling the macro, I want to show whatever tooltip is the ability that comes up first in this macro, I want that to be the tooltip that I'm showing. So if you don't add that in, a lot of the time the macro, if you hover over it, it's not going to give you any information on the hover over. So, I mean, we could talk about later where we might not even need to use show tooltip, but in this case, I want it to show whatever on my toolbar when I've got that macro on my toolbar. This is the ability that's associated with it, and it gives me that information. And cooldown.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, once you make the macro, you can select the picture that is used. So if you're using this for a certain ability, you can use that picture for that macro. But if you're doing it like in this case, I'm thinking we're going to have multiple options. And we'll kind of talk about that here. So maybe we'll save that thought for the next line here. So this line here is telling us we're mousing over, we're going to harm this thing. We're going to use talent 4/1, which is Mighty Bash. So the next line after the semicolon is bracketed at mouse over, harm exists, talent 4/2, talent mass entanglement, semicolon. So, and then after that, it's talent 4/3 typhoon. So that second line of code, if Mighty Bash isn't the talent you've selected, it's then going to look through the talent tree and pick the next one. Is that right?
Yeah. So you're able to add in, and all of these things within the brackets are called a conditional. So if somebody's familiar with programming, they'll know what that is. But in a basic sense, the conditional is saying, with these conditions in this order, I'm going to then we meet that criteria and we're going to cast that ability that we've specified. So in this case, because I have the two brackets for each of the abilities before Typhoon, it's going to look for if I have a mouse over target that is an enemy, it exists, and I'm selected this talent spec, then it's going to go to my mouse over target. If I don't have a mouse over target, then it's going to just default to my target. So that's why the second conditional brackets are there, so that I have that option. If I'm not mouse overing at that time, it's just going to go with whatever my target is.
Okay. And that's something you have selected, ready to rock and roll. And then, like you're saying, you could be DPS in the boss, and then you're going to mouse over that ad you need to kick. And so that's what you're setting up to try to stop, basically, or to deal with while you're fighting.
Yep.
Cool. Nice. And so, kind of diving into this a little more. So the harm tells it to damage, right? Is there something like if it's a heal spell, would you still use harm, or if it's like a friendly target? What do you know what you'd put in there?
Help. So you would use help, and an example of that might be, I know a lot of people. So my keybinds are pretty all over the place. I've got I've got all control shift modifiers for everything. I've got crazy amounts of keybinds, but a lot of people like having a clean UI. They only want to have like 8 keybinds. So what you could potentially do is set one where it's a /cast, and you could do a conditional help, and so it could be like flash heal. If it's a help target, like a friendly target, I could cast a flash heal, and then I could do a semicolon similar to this macro here, and then on the next one I could do a conditional for harm, and I could make it smite. So if I'm targeting a help target, it's going to cast that heal that I want to cast. If I'm targeting an enemy, it's going to cast an offensive spell at them. So that way I've got one keybind. I don't have to have smite and flash heal on different keybinds. It's just all one-stop shop.
All right there. Now, picking the picture, like if you are used to looking at your bars, you know what smite and flash heal look like.
Yeah.
How would you keep that in line? So like if you had this setup like you're giving here as a great example, by the way, does the show tooltip give you the information of both spells, or is it just the one, like the first one?
It'll show whatever's the valid one. So if I am targeting that help target, it's going to show me flash heal. If I'm targeting a harm target, it's going to flip to smite.
Okay. And does the picture change with it?
Yes. So that's why the show tooltip is pretty important. You can something where you don't have an ability specified. Maybe you've got a focus macro or some sort of chat macro. Setting that default icon is great because it gives you that visual reminder of this is what that macro is. But if you're using something that has multiple abilities in it, that's where show tooltip is really, really helpful because it will dynamically change.
Right. So now, do you just use the first icon that you give the option to use, or? Okay, so just that question mark then.
Yeah, I mean, if you want something clearer in your macro menu, because that can get pretty cluttered, and you're having to click through and find things. But yeah.
Okay, so as long as you have the coding in there correctly and you have those options there, it's going to help you identify what you're doing.
Yes.
Cool. Man, I have to mess with this. I have macros everywhere. So let's see here. So let's talk about some of the things that we would do to, let's say we want a macro. Let's say we get a trinket, an unused trinket. I absolutely hate those because it's hard to keep track of them when you're not, if you're not paying attention, or if you have it somewhere that you have to click a different button or push something else to get it going. How would we go about creating a macro to add that to like a main attack?
Yeah. So each slot on your character equipped screen and your bag space actually have a numerical value associated with them. So on the most basic macro you could do a /use, and you could name that trinket in there. What's a little more efficient for creating a macro, though, because we're wanting to try to make this as efficient as possible, we're not having to go into that macro and edit what trinket's in there whenever we switch a trinket. You can actually take the equip slot number and put that in the macro. So, and this is useful for professions that have like engineering, where you can tinker your belt and get that belt shield or the belt fear. You can macro your belt so that if you're constantly changing belt, especially with this corruption system where you've got 50 pieces in your bags, you're not sure what you're going to be wearing that raid. You can just bind that slot instead of each individual item.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a big time helper there. And how that would look. So like if we're to code that, we would type in the $sign or hashtag, depending on what generation you're in. Show tooltip. Now, since we're doing multiple items, we probably don't want to put a spell or item behind that. Because if you do that line, show tooltip, and like Healing Tide Totem afterwards, for example, it'll just show the tooltip for Healing Tide Totem.
Yes.
That's what I've noticed. And then we do that. Now we just do /use and then whatever slot that is, correct?
Correct.
Now would we have to type in slot, or would it just be like use 14 or whatever that is?
Yeah, so, and there is a, on WoW Wiki, that's a pretty good resource. It has a lot of the API and Lua stuff. It has the inventory item numbers. So you would literally just do /use, and then trinket slot 1 is 13, and trinket slot 2 is 14.
Okay. You just type those in, and away you go. So then after we have that, so it'd be /use, and then whatever slot we're using, and then you type /cast, and then whatever spell you want. Or you can set up the cast app mouse over, this nice long big thing to differentiate between the talents you're using. So when I did, so just as an example of kind of what I use, when I do my Healing Tide, I do the $, show tooltip. I do a raid warning, which is a /RW, so you can do the emotes that way. And then I yell out Roll Tide, and then /cast Healing Tide Totem. And then that way it pops up on the screen that gets the big loud notification I've rolled Tide. Now all my healers know what spell I've used.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of an example of something that I use. Well, cool. So what other situations do you think we would want to use macros in?
Yeah. So there's all sorts of crazy mount macros you can do. They're a little less relevant now that the random favorite mount is pretty well built out in WoW now, but there was a time where you had to have 5 different mounts binded to the screen.
Yep.
So, but I think there's a few that are super helpful. So sometimes there will be a fight mechanic that's something like a protection paladin is really useful for, because they have bop. They can basically make themselves immune to certain mechanics. But I'm a tank, so I'll probably want to get aggro back on that boss pretty quickly if I'm dropping threat. So having something where it's called a cancel aura macro is very useful. So as you know, when you're in a party or a raid, you've got all sorts of buffs flying on you. You've got trinkets proccing, you've got heals going on you, so your buff bar looks kind of crazy, jumping all over the place. If I'm trying to find a buff I want to right click off of myself, it's really difficult to do. I don't want to sit in an ice block for 8 seconds necessarily if I was just trying to immune a mechanic. So being able to do a macro where I can / cancel aura ice block is very helpful as a mage. Bunch of classes have different buffs they might want to take off themselves. Another useful one that we're finding with this raid is if anybody has tried to kick a warlock gateway or tried to use a warlock gateway while all 20 people in the raid are trying to click on the same warlock gate, you're probably going to miss it, and you might get hit by a Vexiona breath or something. So there are ways around it using a / focus at mouse over. You can actually set warlock gateways as your focus target that way. So
that's cool.
And then there is a way in the key bindings to keybind interact with focus. So it's a 2-step part. You use a macro, a very basic macro, to focus the warlock gateway because it's your mouse over target at that point, and then you're using a keybind to interact with the warlock gateway. So then you're taking away the whole I have to be right clicking this gateway at the exact right time, where I can just interact with it whenever I need to. So there's little ways around Blizzard trying to take away some of that functionality, but it still exists if you know how to build the macro right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, is that like one of those TOS things where we're going to get banned because you?
No. No. This is all
right click a demon gate.
Still working within the limitations they've placed on the game.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's great information, because I think with the macro says, like, there's so many cool things you can do just to help make life easier that isn't explained anywhere by Blizzard, like in game. I think this is good information that people can use to really, like, I mean, if you're having troubles in those raid situations where you're having a hard time like communicating or moving around, like you just mentioned, using demon gates or whatever, just using your on-use trinkets when you need them to, like, this is where those pieces can help kind of maybe put that last piece of the puzzle in for you to help you get good.
Absolutely.
Now I have some on cursor macros.
Yes.
I just want to do a little word of warning on these on cursor macros. They are sweet if your cursor's in the right spot. So if you try to click stuff like I do from time to time, and let's say I'm on my Death Knight and I click my Death and Decay, it's in my one slot on my bar, I will drop Death and Decay behind me and to the left because it'll go on my cursor. Now, if I have the cursor out and I push 1, then it drops it right where my cursor is. Life is good. But just keep that in mind as you're creating these things and you're in the heat of battle. So, have you ever had one of those moments, and I'm sure you have, where you've created like an on cursor and you bumped your mouse and you accidentally like pulled a group ahead of you or something?
So yeah, I do use Starfall at cursor macro because having to click an additional time to drop that little targeting reticle can be kind of annoying at times. So I've
Mhm.
definitely done a Starfall pull or two on accident. Uh, fortunately or unfortunately, Starfall is not really used right now because of how weak it is. But
Mhm.
thinking back to macro disasters, I think one that stands out to me was in Cataclysm in Firelands on Ragnaros. So one of the phases had these living meteors that would chase a person until they hit it with an ability, and then it would
Mhm.
get knocked back, and it would decide, I'm going to chase somebody else. Now, DPS Death Knights were great on that fight because you could literally spam Death Grip at them.
Mhm.
It would reset the Death Grip cooldown because it wasn't a valid target to Death Grip,
Mhm.
but it would still recognize that you were knocking it back and switching targets.
Mhm.
So I built this macro out, and it was working pretty well to change targets to the living meteor and then back to Ragnaros.
Mhm.
Now, this is the days of when Death Grip, regardless of your spec, would still taunt the boss. I was fiddling around with the macro, and one of our really clean pulls, I guess I had at some point taken out the target living meteor part of it.
Mhm.
So I just went spamming Death Grip on Ragnaros and wiped the raid.
It's called a whoop de doodle right
It's
there.
a little whoopsie.
Yeah,
Raid lead not too happy.
that's so awesome. So I wanted to kind of emphasize that because I have also had some trials and tribulations with the on cursor macro action. It was funny. We were in a Mythic Plus run, and I was right when I was switching over to Elemental, and I put my Earthquake on cursor, and I was cruising around, and at this point I was two handed on the keyboard because I was trying to figure out my key binds and everything. This is before I got my 12 button mouse, and so my right hand would come off the mouse, hit my keypad, my numpad, do damage, do the things, and then I would have to go back and click the button or put my mouse where I wanted it, and then hit my earthquake. Right. Well, I can't tell you how many times I bumped my mouse and flung off the earthquake three groups down. This is doing Motherload. So Motherload is a super mob dense dungeon if you haven't done it yet.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was not good. We did not time. I can tell you that right now because I kept screwing up the pull because I kept bumping my mouse. So if you're gonna do the on cursors, just be aware that it's super. You better be on your game for the on cursor. Otherwise, you're gonna have some issues.
Yes, it is extremely nice taking away that extra click, especially if you're healing and you're used to raid clicking for your heals. But yeah, it can be
Yes,
deadly if you're not paying attention.
it is not good. But they're definitely helpful. Like they're it's really cool. Like I have it on cursor for my death and decay, like I was mentioning, and it makes life so much easier because when I want to go and I need to pull something and I'm ready to rock and roll, I just put that cursor over, drop the death and decay, and we move to that circle there. It's definitely awesome.
Yes.
Let's see here. So moving along now, communication information is important in group settings, as we know. Um, now, are there any macros you have that you use to help communicate what you're doing to the group?
So I do the rare times that I play Guardian or Feral. I do have one that announces to party or to raid that I am using Stampeding Roar. That is one of those buffs that's pretty obvious because you all of a sudden start running really fast. But it is nice to announce those things. One that I use quite heavily is Innervate. So I have a weak aura combined with my healers actually have a macro to slash whisper each of the druids, just the word Innervate, and we have a weak aura that picks up that message tells us innervate this person, and that's who we're going to innervate. And it sends them a message back based on the cooldown, based on the time. So there's a lot of interaction you can get with weak auras and macros. So communication there works really well. You can always do a fun bloodlust macro where you just yell wog, like, in true orc fashion. The bloodlust's in you, and that lets your raid know, okay, I'm going to do a lot more damage for a while.
He's having a moment. Oh, we should probably kill harder. That's awesome.
You can announce, like you were saying earlier, telling people they're looking at stuff at their feet, they're trying to get out of stuff, saying, hey, Spirit Link's down, you dummies, jump in it. So
yeah,
just various communication to cooldowns is always really helpful.
It is. And one that I had, and that I am sad that I can't use anymore because it made me laugh. Back in Nighthold, there was this lovely trinket off of Trilliax that dropped called the Perfectly Preserved Cake. Now, for those of you who don't know what that does, it's a little cake that you drop down on the ground, and it passes out 5 priest bubbles, basically. And so when I would drop that thing, people would run away from it because obviously on that fight, he drops cake and you don't want the cake, right? So on that one, I had a show tooltip, Perfectly Preserved Cake, because I wanted it it's just for this one move here. Then I did a /E for emote. So in the chat box, it would say Cyrub. And then I put the text in, rubs the cake on his chest and lovingly forces the rest into your mouth, because I'm that kind of guy. Sharing is caring. And then I did a /raid warning that yelled, eat yo fucking cake. And then /use Perfectly Preserved Cake. So you can actually do the /use and then whatever you're trying to use, or the trinket slot. So in this case, I just used the cake. So that told my raid teammates that I was giving them cake, which is good. And don't run from it, and to eat the cake, because people were running away from it instead of running to it to get the buff. So, of course, you have to know your audience. And that could have been offensive, which I understand. But yeah, my audience appreciated that, and they laughed pretty hard at it. So
it's delicious.
It was wonderful. It was perfectly preserved. I mean, it was like a 1,000-year-old cake, but you wouldn't have known it.
Always trust baked goods that you pick up in a dungeon. I think that's a general rule of thumb, right? Like accepting candy from strangers.
Yes. Yes. Definitely recommend old cakes from raids. So, but yeah, that's just an example of stuff you can do while you're there to help communicate with people. And also, I've used macros to help me find things. So I'll be trying to find something. There's I was leveling an alt, and I was doing I think you have to whistle at a bunch of rams.
Yes.
This is over in Dune Moreau. And I made a macro for that. And all I did was go macro screen, picked a picture, typed in /whistle, and clicked the things, and it /whistled at them.
Yes.
So if you need to find certain people or certain things, you can use macros there. I know there's there's like a camel you can get in Uldum, right? That you can find the little, you have to find the little statuette that's just hanging out in the middle of this giant, vast desert. And I think people that I know made a macro to find that little statuette, and it was like /target and then whatever the hell the statuette's called.
Yeah.
And they just fly around and do that. Not
one of the
life of me.
Well, there's also one in the Vale where if you farm the Vale enough, and with the new assaults, you're always farming there pretty much. There's an item that drops called the Xantian Lasso, and it's an on-use thing to capture one of the random spawn mounts that spawns in the air. So essentially, you'll fly up into the air at this certain spot in Vale, and you'll see 10 people sitting there waiting for this thing to spawn. So you're fighting 10 people to try and capture this mount. You want to create a /target the name of this mount /use this lasso, and you just spam that macro. You just sit there and you press that button until the mount spawns 3 hours later. So you just want that competitive advantage to make sure that you can get your mount achievements.
That's right.
It's cutthroat out there.
It is. It's kill or be killed. And if you don't macro, you're going to have a rough time on that one.
Yes.
Oh, man. Good stuff. So, resources. Now, where can we go to go and help us with our macro learning? What are some sites that you go to that helps?
Yeah, and so I'm sure we can do links on the website or show notes, but there is a really good, I would call it an intro and a learn more type of document by a hunter named Ad Reaver. He made a Blizzard post on the forums a couple years ago. It covers the intros. It covers a lot of the useful ones that you'll run into, and then kind of the basics of scripting if you want to get a little more advanced. Each of the class guides on like Wowhead or Icy Veins will typically have a section of commonly used macros. Some of the class discords will have those as well. There's also some really good YouTube videos out there too. So I know if you're wanting to get into PvP, a lot of that is going to be using at arena target, at party type of casts, where you don't want to call out who I'm about to polymorph. You don't want to have them targeted because they're just going to tell their mage, you're getting polymorphed. I want to kind of sneak up on them with a polymorph. So Sea-Doo is a resto shaman that has a couple good videos out there covering his entire list of macros that he uses. So
wow,
there's a lot of resources out there. There's not like a central hub for them all, unfortunately, at least that I've found. But doing research, trying to see which expansion they're talking about is important too, because these change. So
yep, Shadowlands is coming, and that's going to be fun. Trying to deal with that. So I know kind of a side story here. We went to BlizzCon together, and we were sitting down to play the Shadowlands demo, and I'm sitting there cruising around like do, and you haven't moved yet. And I was like, aren't you going to play the game? And you're like, bro, I need my macros. I was like, that's fair. That's fair. So
like,
I thought that was pretty funny.
They gave me an unused trinket. I have to combine it with my big DPS cooldown. That's
right. You got to be prepared.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are going to struggle. But no, I thought that was funny. Cool, man. Yeah, so definitely check out the resources. Good information there. It's going to definitely help your play out because there's a lot of things that Blizzard kind of relies on the community to do, and macros and add-ons is one of them. So in your opinion, speaking of add-ons, when do you think you should probably flip it over to just getting an add-on? Because I know there's a point like for healing add-ons. I know Voodoo keeps it all in nice compact area. If I have a whole bunch of mouse overs, I mean, like, what, in your opinion, like, when do you think you should just say, all right, I'm going to go get the add-on or a weak order or something?
Yeah, so macros are good at kind of reducing keybinds that you have. They're good at combining the on-use trinkets and everything into that. But if I'm trying to effectively communicate information to a raid team that I run with a lot, so if we're trying to call out on specific times what Drestigath target, what tentacle somebody should be on, that's going to make a lot more sense to use something like a boss mod to announce timers, or to use a weak aura, which can actually built out to interact with timers, to interact with health percentages, all sorts of much more advanced data coming from the fight, whereas a macro is going to be much more ability based. So if you're trying to communicate information to a group that you run with a lot, finding a lot of those weak auras on Wago is super helpful. Using boss mods like Big Wigs or DBM, or the Little Wigs is the the dungeon version of Bigwigs. So those are very useful to have built out.
Nice.
And of course the healing add-ons. I was using Grid and Click as soon as it became available in late vanilla, early BC. Like I was on that train long ago when I was a main healer, and I think that's just the style I grew accustomed to. But I know mythic level famed slayers of N'Zoth or whatever the title is now, top 100 that use mouse over still, and to much success.
They're doing pretty good. Nice. Well, this leads us to my favorite part of the show. I know we did one scrub moment earlier, and I hope I didn't get excited and jump the gun on that. But what is your favorite macro related scrub-tastic moment?
I briefly played a priest in Eternal Palace because Shadow was pretty powerful. We needed some master spells. We needed the dot damage. So
gotta have more dots.
More dots. Getting into that. It was still pretty fresh to it, but having Leap of Faith is a very powerful or evil tool, depending how you use it. As it's colloquially known, life grip, although sometimes it's a death grip. And some pulls we have a macro to grip somebody into certain doom. Everybody laughs about it because it's already a wipe. It's whatever. This was not a certain case, so similar to my death grip example earlier with Ragnaros. I still had one of our healers targeted in my macro, like specifically called out at Jimmy. They're in a very specific he needs to dispel while I'm line of sighted situation, so I don't blow up the raid. I life gripped him straight to me as he's dispelling me, thus subsequently killing him, wiping the raid, and having to explain that one. So always make sure pre-fight you got the right macro set up.
Oh, that's beautiful. It just makes me happy. I mean, and that's like you're saying, that spell can be used for good or evil.
Oh, yeah.
Or both. I know I've been life gripped to my doom on some elevator bosses.
Yes. Oh, elevator, especially the buggy Nihilotha one. It's great fun.
Oh, dude. No, I died on that one just on my own because I'm that good. But I've definitely had my fair share. Like we have a priest in our group, and people have switched around, and we've had players come and go as that class, and they have definitely ended my life in hilarious ways with large falls. Oh man, well, that is awesome. So, do you have any final thoughts, tips, tricks, anything like that you'd like to share that maybe we didn't cover?
Each class is going to have their own specific benefits to having macros. At stealth classes, there is a conditional called stealth or no stealth that you should really look into. The rogue or the druid resources should have some sort of stealth, no stealth mod that will actually allow you to spam your stealth key or your prowl key, which is very useful because if you've played one of those classes before and you've tried to stealth while you're trying to get out of a CC or something, and all of a sudden for you to just bring yourself back out of stealth because you've pressed the key too many times, it's a good way to stop yourself from de-stealthing immediately.
Oh, that's good. Well, cancel aura, that's the same thing with that as well. Something to look out for.
Yes.
If you have the cancel aura in there, try not to smash the key. Now, if you are panicking and smashing, you might start your cast and then cancel that immediately. So
I'm definitely somebody who benefits from having the cancel aura on a separate keybind. I know a lot of people like to combine them because they'll only press it once. Me, no, I spam keys, so I need 2 keybinds. One for the ability, one to cancel it.
There you go. Very good to know. So, I mean, where can we find you on the social medias?
In a bunker, in a COVID bunker right now. No, I am. I guess I just have the YouTube channel at this point. Projali LN, and I think that's pretty much all I'm active on as far as WoW goes.
Cool. Yeah, and you can go find mythic kills there.
Yes.
So if you're interested in finding out what to do to help strats, you can. You guys have your guild chat in there too, right?
Sometimes I get the music a little too loud, but yeah, we have all the comms are on the kills, so
it happens.
You can see it in action.
Nice. Oh yeah, man. Well, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Definitely, it was fun chatting again.
Hell yeah, it was good times. We definitely got to get more Mythic Plus going.
Indeed,
I got to get you're helping me get that Horde shaman up so I can have some fun Horde adventures, and hopefully you'll join me for those.
Indeed.
So if you're looking to play Horde or have Horde tunes and you want to join, keep your eyes peeled on the website. And with that, my friend, I will let you go.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the show, everyone. You can find us on Twitter at ScrubsVerse. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Cyro. You can now find us on Facebook on the Scrubs vs. the World podcast page. And you can catch up on old episodes at scrubsvstheworld.com. Next weekend, come join me on Twitch as we talk macros and put on an actual clinic for building your very own macros. And wherever you are out there, I hope you're staying safe. And as always, keep getting good.